Welcome back, Chappelle, to your first flip 2020. And my God, it's a new decade. It's crazy. All right, now let's go ahead and get into it, though. All right, we in class kind of just like set the stage of this entire unit. Kind of talked about like your flip quizzes that'll be coming up in the future now, and talked about like some change-ups. Kind of just did some housekeeping things and got you like nice and settled into the new quarter, right? So this unit is only going to last tops 2 weeks, tops, like at the very, very most, all right? So it's pretty short, and we'll have a quiz coming up relatively pretty soon. And anyway, though, we are now getting into Western civilizations since the year circa 1500, all right? So go ahead and write, like, in your notes, this is like Western civilization since 1500, all right? So like 1500 and on. So we have now already know that, like, Columbus has landed in the Bahamas, and the Europeans are now completely aware that there are two new continents out there, right? North and South America. Amerigo Vespucci does a lot of the early maps of that, and then he ends up getting the names of these continents named after him because of his cartographical work. Yeah, all right, so... And also, Magellan has now attempted to circumnavigate the globe around like 1520, and he dies in the Philippines, right? But we're fully aware of a couple of things. We are fully aware that the Earth is round. We are fully aware, even though some people somehow disagree with that, we are fully aware that the Earth is round. We are fully aware, the Europeans are fully aware that there are two new places. We are fully aware that there are going to be natives that they interact with, and we are fully aware that Spain and Portugal are still currently the dominant powers in Europe because the Pope has drawn that line. They're now going to try and get involved, right? So, and let's go ahead and start with the eastern side, though. We're going to get into the Portuguese first. So, as we know, the Portuguese set their main focus on trying to find that path to India, right? And they had to go all the way around Africa and past a place called the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and actually get all the way into India, and they set up a spice trading network that went all the way around Africa, right? Go ahead and jot this down. The Portuguese are going to use that network to trade in the following things: gold, sugar, slaves, and spices, all right? We're focusing mainly on the three S's, though: slaves, spices, sugar, right? So the Portuguese are going to win over local princes in some parts of India with the promise of aid to fight off more Europeans, and then they're also going to bombard some other places with cannon fire, and then they're going to basically take over the coast of India, right, to try and get their spices. And then they're going to use coastal ports to pick up slaves, and they're going to also use places like the Azore Islands off the coast of Africa to start growing sugar, which becomes a very, very big cash crop at this time, right? So, and you can write that down next to sugar. Be like, cash crop. Makes a lot of money, all right? Especially for the Spanish when we get into that here in a little bit. Now, the Portuguese are going to win over local princes, and the Indian Ocean actually at one point became so controlled by the Portuguese that they, like most of Europe, ended up calling it the Portuguese Lake, okay? So this area, though, is a very, very important place. This place to the north of Australia is a place called the Spice Islands, all right, also known as the Moluccas Islands, all right, Moluccas, the Moluccas Islands, aka the Spice Islands, right, which is another area that grew spices outside of India, right? And now some of you are immediately saying, well, wait a minute, if there's another place that grows spices, that means the Portuguese are going to want that too. The thing about it is the Portuguese vested interest existed in Africa and India, so they did not have the funds, finances, or the means to spread all the way out throughout most of Asia. Some of you are probably like, well, what about the Australians? They're not there yet, all right? So the only people that lived in Australia at this time are natives, for the most part anyway. And then also you're like, well, there's probably some like natives that live there as well. You're right, but the Chinese were economically isolated. The group that's going to go to these Spice Islands, write this down. They're going to go to these Spice Islands, and they're going to realize that the Portuguese are making all the money and that they want to take these trade routes from them. So on the eastern half of the world, in this part of the unit, we are talking about a feud between two new groups in Europe. Well, one old group, the Portuguese, and a new one. And they're called the Dutch. All right, so like anyway, the Dutch are going to be able to try and take this trade route from the Portuguese, right? So the Dutch. Just a heads up, the Dutch are from the Netherlands, all right? So the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands is a country to the north of Germany and to the north of Belgium, right? Belgium didn't exist yet, and Germany didn't exist yet either. It was the Holy Roman Empire. So the Netherlands, to give you a little bit of backstory, had recently broken away from the Holy Roman Empire and became a completely autonomous country. Autonomous meaning that they are their own country with their own government. One of their leaders is called the Prince of Orange. All right, so because they are believed that that's the house of the royal house in the Netherlands is symbolized by the orange flag. But also, they set up their district, a district system, and the Prince of Orange is the one that's the prince of the most dominant district, and he eventually becomes king, right? So now, that's not important, though, okay? What you do need to know is that the Dutch are Protestant, all right? They are Calvinist Protestant, all right? So they believe in predestination. They believe in this idea of only wearing black and white. They believe that you should not do anything in public like drink or sing loudly or do anything that distracts from God, but they are a type of Protestant, okay? And so the Dutch realize, though, that with their Protestant beliefs, that they can be very good at doing one thing that doesn't distract from God, and that's making money, all right? The Dutch are going to be responsible for creating the stock market. The Dutch are going to be responsible for creating a new intercoastal trade route around Africa. So the Dutch are going to set up, though, a strategic location in Cape Town, South Africa. Some of y'all are immediately asking, why did you tell me they were Protestant? That doesn't seem that important. The fact that they're Protestant means that they have the right and the ability to go and take Portugal's trade routes from them without stirring up a fuss in their own church. If the Dutch were Catholic, the Pope would have stopped them from going and taking this trade route from them. So we're still feeling the reverberations and the effects of Martin Luther's Reformation, right? And this is in the 1600s when this is going to happen. So we just fast forwarded about 100 years on the eastern side of the world, and the Dutch, which are from the Netherlands, they wear these goofy wooden shoes, and they have windmills, as you know, and they're very famous for tulips because of this thing called tulip mania, but don't get me started on that. Now, the Dutch are going to set up a strategic location in Cape Town, South Africa, right? So they're going to go all the way down here, all the way to the Cape of Good Hope down here, and they're going to cut the Portuguese trade route off. And they're going to set this location, and this is going to give them a middle ground between Europe and Asia and a foothold as well in Africa, right? So they use this, though, to force the Portuguese out, right? They believe that if they cut that trade route off, they can now push the Portuguese aside and cut it in half, right? So wealthy Dutch merchants are going to realize that, we have to figure out a way to keep our government out of this, right? Because if our government is involved in the taking of the Portuguese trade route from the Portuguese, then this is going to result in a large war. And this means that we might end up bringing the full fury of all the Catholic nations down upon us. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now in Europe. There's this big thing called the 30 Years' War. France is super involved with it. This other royal family named the Habsburgs is going on as well. We're going to end up getting into all those guys a little bit later when we talk about the age of absolutism coming after the Reformation. But wealthy Dutch merchants realize we stand to make a lot of money, and we can keep this out of the hands of the government, and that we can actually control these funds. So they set up a sovereign company called the East India Company, right? The EIC, the East India Company, right? The East India Company means that we're going to focus on this eastern side, and we're going to control the Indian spice trade, right? And use also our spice islands in Java, right? So they're not controlled by a government, which is what the word sovereign means. Now, the EIC is going to eventually surpass the Portuguese and begin to dominate trade in Asia, right? They're going to show up at Portuguese forts on the coast of India, and they're going to force them out. So where the Portuguese used to be the dominant power in India, now that power has passed to the Dutch, right? So, and some of y'all are immediately thinking, oh, wait, I know about the East India Company. They come up in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. You're not wrong, but you're thinking of the different East India Company, all right? There are two different East India Companies. One is the Dutch East India Company, and the other one is this one, the British East India Company, right? So, going forward, though, eventually the Dutch are going to lock that area down, right? But there's going to be a growth of two rival East India companies. So you do need to know these symbols. So draw this in your notes real quick, okay? So I'm going to show you one. So we've got this, we got this, we got that. Okay, so an O, a C, and a V laying over top of them. Hold on, let me try and draw that a little bit better. So we got V, O, C. That right there is the Dutch East India Company symbol. You can actually see it right down here, right? That's the Dutch East India Company symbol, right? And this, of course, was made in 1799. It's a very, very old document with their seal on it. Then the British East India Company is going to look like this. 3 crosses, and then an E, an I, and a C, all right? That's the British East India Company. You need both of these symbols in your notes, all right? So the British East India Company is going to end up forming itself just like the Dutch one did, and then they're going to set their sights on India as well. And so the British East India Company shows up. They go straight after India, trying to find a better route to go ahead and control that, and it basically just ends up being a British colony, right? So the Spanish take over the Philippines. The British buy out the East India Company, not from the Dutch. Don't write that. The British create their own East India Company, okay, and kick the Dutch out of India for the most part, right? The Dutch continue to use the Spice Islands that they had for a long time, so they're really, really doing okay. And this is the first step to the Brits owning and controlling India. So the British are going to set up a defensive position in India, and they're going to try and lock down that country as a whole. And this has major reverberations as time goes on. But we just kind of go ahead and glossed over, like what happened in the Asian side of the line of demarcation, right? We just gave you a crash course in it, okay? And then we got the Americas, right? Because after Columbus landed in the Americas, he started a chain reaction that's going to drastically affect the lives of the people that live there. And it's going to drastically really change everything. But we're going to go ahead and stop there for this flip. Welcome to the new quarter. Welcome to the new semester. I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. I think you will. This is the best stuff. We got the World Wars coming up. We got the Age of Absolutism coming up, the Scientific Revolution, all the super dense, really neat stuff, right? So I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a good one.